Hello, John here, and today I want to discuss how one should consider investing their money during this current recessionary period, specifically in the stock market. The current volatility of the US economy is making the question of where to put one's money ever more enigmatic, and today I want to give a detailed explanation of what to look for in companies while investing in the stock market. I'll give some examples of which companies and sectors to invest in, as well as how long I think it will be until we see a reversal of this trend. So first off, I just want to preface this. Are we at the bottom? I think probably no. I mean, some people do think, last 2 weeks have been pretty good for the markets. I mean, like I'm up like 5% over the last 2 weeks, but I think the chances of this like actually being based off of fundamentals is quite low. Um, I mean, crude oil did decrease in price, so there's that. But I think this is something that they call a dead cat bounce, or basically, where it's not actually an improvement of the fundamentals. Because I mean, like in the short term, I'm sure there will be some increases in the stock market, but over 6 months to 2 years, the market's not going to improve until we get inflation under control. Also, like if we take a look at like historical decreases in S&P, it goes down to like 30 to 40% in most bear markets. Now, because of the uniquely terrible circumstances, $30 trillion of debt, $300 billion of interest per interest point we increase, and a debt that's larger than our GDP. I'm thinking it'll go as low as 50 to 60%. So yeah, and we're not even technically in bear market territory as of the making of this video. And with the complacency of the Fed, not doing exactly what they should be doing, the prospects that we actually get a soft landing in quotation marks there, is getting worse day by day. So now, I'll just go into what is causing the recession. We need to identify what causes the recession to know, I guess, what would be a decent thing to invest in. I mean, in 2008, we had the mortgage crisis, which meant people were defaulting on their debt of their houses. So logically, you should have avoided investing in banks as they were taking the brunt of the damage from the defaults, as well as associated industries like construction due to the massive oversupply of houses at the time, which left little demand for new house construction. Also, people generally don't build during recessions, obviously. The same thing, we need to find quality companies that will perform well during a recession caused by an inflationary cycle. What does this mean? Well, if we take a look at this from a cause and effect lens, we see that an inflationary cycle that is primarily causing the recession in the USA, which means that the price of inputs and the goods and services that companies provide has increased substantially. Right? Yes. As a result, companies that are able to absorb the costs of recession and distribute those costs onto consumers are important prerequisites for good performance during these times. Not only that, but to curb inflation, the Fed will probably raise interest rates, which will impact the operations of companies whose debt load is too high. They will be burned by the rising interest rates, which will make costs on borrowed money more expensive, which can have a hugely negative impact on certain overleveraged industries. And as such, having the ability to pay down any debt is important for any company to keep afloat amid rising costs of operations and rising costs of debt. So, with that in mind, let's dive into the specifics of the checklists that you should pay attention to when evaluating when, or rather, which companies will perform well during a recession. So first off, large cash reserves. I mean, this is pretty like self-explanatory. Your company wants to have large cash reserves. I mean, some may say this isn't a good idea because we have high inflation, and high inflation logically eats away at cash reserves. But cash reserves are necessary to pay down debt, to avoid borrowing, and to be able to reinvest into the operations when the opportunity presents itself. What do I mean by this? Well, let's start off with rising interest rates, which make borrowing, less attractive for the average company. As such, if the company needs to borrow money to keep afloat, um, during these trying times, then they have a far lower chance of surviving this economic downturn as opposed to a company with large cash reserves. Also, cash is necessary to pay down debt. Now, it must be said that companies who have foreseen this economic downturn, have made attempts to reduce their debt load. So that's something to look out for when evaluating the company. Not only that, but ample cash reserves allow companies to expand their operations once conditions improve. Because, like, if conditions were to hypothetically improve, like, within the next year, it would be unfortunate for a company to be unable to expand or maintain its operations once economic conditions improve. solely due to inability to invest in its operations from lack of capital or lack of investor confidence, which I guess is technically the same thing. But yeah. Next, you have low debt. I mean, low debt's like pretty necessary because, like I said before, debt payments are increased during times of high interest rates. Now, some may say that debt is a good thing to have during times of high inflation, as they're eaten away, by rising inflation. But the increased interest rate payments, in my opinion, will eventually outweigh the benefit of increasing inflation. Also, during times of inflation caused recession, the profit margins of companies on average will take a hit because generally, when the economy is slowing down, people tend to spend less and save more, which will reduce revenue of most companies and can thereby limit the company's ability to pay off debt. So if you have higher fixed costs, like the cost of debt is going up and the cost of the debt that you already have is going up while you're making less money, this is like a double whammy on your company. So, or rather the company you seek to invest in. So if you want your company to avoid or rather survive a recession, remember debt is especially detrimental to the company operations during times of economic recession. Yeah. So next we have um, good margins. Um, Now, for the next two things, like you kind of need either one or both of these things, in my opinion. As like if like the company you're investing in needs to have one of these two things. So first off, you need good profit margins, as oftentimes it's very difficult to pass all the costs of operations, increases in operations onto consumers without losing a fair amount of business. Because competitors will lower prices. So a company with good profit margins will be able to absorb some of the costs of inflating um, input costs without losing profitability. By passing less costs on to consumers, businesses in competitive industries will be in a favorable position. As during tough economic times, like people try to get the best value, the biggest bang for their buck, aka they look for the cheapest option for the most result. So if a company that you're thinking to invest in can outprice competitors while providing a similar level of quality, they will have a easier time surviving this upcoming period. Next, sector dominance slash pricing power. I mean, power over consumers, basically. Think like healthcare, utilities, consumer goods, that sort of thing. Something that people can't live without, or willing to pay a premium for, or yeah. By having an in-demand product that people are willing to pay whatever the company charges, they will be able to avoid the brunt of the pain felt during recessions, and potentially be able to actively increase their business opportunities. Also, if a company has like a large market share in a particular market, like they're like the biggest player by far, and assuming they have an in-demand product, they will likely be able to come out of this period relatively unscathed, at least like compared to like literally everyone else. Because they can pass basically all of the costs on to consumers without fear of losing like without fear of losing large shares of revenue to competitors. So that's very important. So some exemplary companies. Now, I'm not going to say whether I own any of these companies. Well, I do own like Lockheed, Tesla, and TSM. So I'm just going to preface that. But these are sectors slash companies that generally do perform well during recession. So first off, you have Lockheed. It's a defense company. They're the biggest government contractor in terms of self defense. Government has a massive defense budget. Government's one of like the more stable sources of income because of their massive resources. Also, Lockheed provides a lot of things that most other countries can't replicate due to the high barriers to entry into the industries. Tesla Tesla has basically a stranglehold on the US EV market. I'd say like their biggest competitor like on the world stage is probably BYD, the Chinese one, but Tesla has a lot of inf- Tesla has the infrastructure advantage over its competitors, and no one else can really compete with that, at least in the USA. Also, like some may say, like legacy automakers have an edge over Tesla because they have larger cash flows or whatever, and that's technically true. The main problem is they're like massively over encumbered by debt. Like I'm pretty sure like GM has over $100 billion of debt. So I don't think that's a good indicator for going forward. Next, we have Palantir, software companies. Software companies in general actually should theoretically do pretty well, as they have decent like operating margin and stuff. Um, Palantir specifically kind of has like a stranglehold in like the software defense type of deal. They work with both um, normal commercial and government They have two platforms, Foundry and Gotham. I'll make a video on those like another day. I mean, there's like way more. If I'm gonna be honest, there's way more credible people to talk about Palantir than me. So, but just be assured, Palantir is like pretty good in terms of its business prospects going forward. Next, we have Amazon. It has like a stranglehold on online retail. I'm pretty sure no one's surprised by that. I mean, like Jeff Bezos, pretty smart. Also, like Amazon has is always increasing its, I guess, foothold in other industries. That's why they have such high costs. Such high costs and such low gross profit. That's because they're constantly diverting cash towards different endeavors, which is actually like an interesting strategy, and I think it's a good one for growth. We'll see how it goes going forward. And lastly, we have TSM. TSM's like manufacturing of semiconductors. I want to say like they're the best in the industry. I mean, I guess there is Intel who also produces and designs semiconductors, but TSM creates semiconductors for AMD, Nvidia, those guys. Um, and there's not really anyone who does it quite as well as them. Also, they have pretty good operating margins and stuff. So yeah, I like TSM as well. Other sectors that perform well, consumer goods, healthcare, utilities, the ones I mentioned earlier. Note like this is like by no means like comprehensive at all. Like in terms of like which sectors will do well. This is just like some of the ones that I just like dug up in terms of like research that I've done in the past. And some sectors that are generally hit hard by recessions, airline/travel. I don't think I need to explain why people don't travel when things are bad economically. Like, would you take a trip to like I don't know, like the Bahamas when you can barely struggle to pay off the debts on your house or whatever? So yeah, those, and they also have they have like razor thin margins, so they generally get rattled pretty hard. Next, you have tech. I mean, this is like okay, it's kind of funny because like in the last slide, I kind of mentioned like quite a few tech companies, but I'm just saying as a sector in general, tech companies on the stock market specifically are almost always like valued beyond their what they make in terms of actual profits like right now because most of the time investors try to price in their future prospects. But when things are in recession, people generally tend to care less about future growth than what they're doing, rather as opposed to what they're doing right now. So yeah, tech generally gets hit hard. Next is financial sector. This is kind of self-explanatory. When the economy is doing poorly, the financial sector does poorly. I mean, there's a lot more qualified people to talk about the financial sector doing poorly than me. I mean, economics explained. I don't know if economics explained is good for that, but like, there's a lot of. But if you want to research into that, there's a lot of resources online. Next, you have manufacturing. Manufacturing gets hit hard mainly because when the economy goes into recession, people generally consume less goods, obviously, and as a result, manufacturing takes a hit on their revenue. Also, they already have like razor thin margins, so if they have to, so they can't really afford to decrease it, like decrease their costs that much. I guess they could try increasing prices, but yeah, generally manufacturing gets hit hard, and also construction. It's funny because I kind of mentioned like construction earlier, but like construction is bad for a different I guess a similar reason, but for like it's a different, even though it's a different time. Just people generally tend to like construct less houses. Also, have you like seen the price of lumber recently? It's pretty high. So yeah, this has basically just been like a checklist for what you should look into when investing during recessions. I'll probably make a follow-up video because this is nowhere. I just don't have enough time in a single video to make an entire guide to the stock market during a recession. I'll probably like do like a playlist for that. So this is like yeah. So that's all I have for today. See ya.